The most dangerous threats to your survival do not hide in dark alleys. They sleep in your bed. They make your morning coffee. They ask how your day was. At the beginning of any relationship, we all wear a mask. We present a highly curated version of ourselves designed to secure the other person's interest. It is a standard social transaction. But what happens when the mask you fell in love with was created by a master strategist? And what happens when that strategist realizes you have stopped playing your part in the transaction? Over a decade ago, Gillian Flynn detailed this exact dynamic in Gone Girl. Stripped of its domestic drama, the story serves as a practical blueprint for psychological warfare, asymmetrical revenge, and narrative framing. Introduce the actors in this transaction. The mastermind is an Ivy League-educated writer. She is wealthy, highly intelligent, and possesses a deep understanding of public relations. Her parents made a fortune publishing a series of children's books based on a highly idealized version of her childhood. She grew up watching her real life be edited, polished, and sold for public consumption. She understands that reality is negotiable. The flawed husband is average. He is a former magazine writer who lost his job in the economic downturn. He is laid back, avoidant of conflict, and easily managed. Recently, his behavior shifted. He has relocated his wife from New York to a small, economically depressed town in Missouri. He runs a local bar, financed entirely by his wife's trust fund. And he has begun an affair with one of his 20-year-old creative writing students. He believes he is keeping this secret hidden. He is wrong. To understand her retaliation, one must analyze her initial relationship strategy. For years, the mastermind played the cool girl. This was a highly calculated persona designed to be exactly what the flawed husband wanted. The cool girl drinks cheap beer, eats cold pizza, watches sports, and never complains about male behavior. It is a performance designed to secure loyalty through low-maintenance compliance. But the performance requires reciprocation. When the flawed husband takes this persona for granted, loses his job, relocates her, and starts sleeping with a student, the transaction is broken. The mastermind does not file for divorce. Divorce is a standard bureaucratic exit that leaves both parties with assets and a clean slate. She does not want a clean slate. She wants total liquidation of his life. On the morning of their 5th wedding anniversary, the flawed husband returns home from his morning routine at his bar. He opens the front door. The living room is in disarray. A glass coffee table lies shattered on the hardwood floor. An iron stands hot on the board. A half-filled mug sits on the kitchen counter, and deep scratches mar the wooden door frame. His wife is gone. The physical scene is set. The flawed husband does not recognize the arrangement. He dials the emergency line, reporting his wife's disappearance. 2 police officers arrive at the front door. They walk through the entryway, taking notes and inspecting the broken furniture. The flawed husband leads them through the rooms. He speaks with them calmly, answering their questions, attempting to be helpful. He believes he is assisting an investigation to find his missing wife. He is unaware that the investigation is a closed circuit. The physical evidence has been prepared. The financial records have been altered. The diary entries have been planted. He has just stepped onto a meticulously engineered chessboard, and he is the primary target. The common amateur attempts a frame-up with crude placements. They plant a weapon, a bloody piece of clothing, or a stolen item directly in the suspect's path. This is a high-risk approach. Investigators are trained to spot convenient evidence. The mastermind utilizes a sophisticated methodology, the breadcrumb strategy. She understands a law of human cognitive processing. People believe their own conclusions, far more than those handed to them. If you tell an investigator who the killer is, they will search for discrepancies in your story. But if you plant subtle, disjointed pieces of data and allow the investigator to connect the dots themselves, they will defend that conclusion as if it were their own discovery. They become invested in the narrative. She designs the data points. Over the course of several weeks, she uses a syringe to drain her own blood, storing it in her refrigerator. On the morning of her disappearance, she pours a massive volume of the blood onto the kitchen floor. She cleans it up, but she does so with deliberate imperfection. She knows the detectives will use luminol, a chemical that illuminates trace iron in blood under ultraviolet light. When the light reveals the glowing wiped-away stains on the linoleum, the detectives do not see a clean floor. They see a cover-up. She adds financial metrics. She uses his credentials to log onto his computer, conducting searches for high-payout life insurance policies. She uses his credit cards to purchase expensive luxury goods, sports equipment, high-end electronics, and has them shipped to a storage unit rented in his name. She creates a paper trail of a man in deep debt, desperate for an insurance payout. Her structural masterpiece is the diary. She constructs a physical record of their marriage spanning several years. She does not write it in one sitting. She uses different ink types, varied pen tips, and subtle shifts in handwriting style to simulate the passage of years. The diary is a lesson in narrative pacing. It begins as a standard optimistic love story. It details his charm, his humor, and her affection. Slowly, over hundreds of pages, the entries shift. She introduces minor arguments, then financial tension, then verbal intimidation. The entries record an escalating environment of domestic fear, culminating in the final chilling entry, "This man might kill me." She takes the book, burns the edges, and drops the charred remains into the furnace of his father's old house. She does not hide it too well. She leaves it where a systematic search is guaranteed to locate it. Once the police discover this document, the psychological trap is complete. The investigators experience confirmation bias. They establish a firm hypothesis. The flawed husband murdered his wife to escape financial ruin and secure an insurance payout. From this point forward, every action the husband takes is filtered through this lens. If he is calm, they see a cold, calculating sociopath. If he is agitated, they see a panic-stricken killer losing control. Every piece of normal human behavior is converted into evidence of guilt. The flawed husband assists in his own destruction. He is arrogant, and he believes his laid-back demeanor can manage the situation. He fails to recognize that he is dealing with a professional campaign. His primary error is concealment. He hides his affair with his student from the detectives, assuming that if they discover it, he will simply look bad. He does not realize that in a murder investigation, a hidden affair is not a social embarrassment, it is a motive. A detective kneels by the rusted door of the basement furnace. He shines a flashlight into the interior. He reaches inside and retrieves the charred remains of the notebook. He flips open the fragile, blackened pages. He reads the final, hurried lines of handwriting. The steel trap snaps shut. The detectives close the file on a missing person case. They open the file on a homicide, and the flawed husband is their only suspect. The police department is a structured, logical institution. They require physical evidence, warrants, and procedural steps. But there is a much larger, faster, and more volatile entity that operates outside the legal framework. The mastermind targets. The mob. The mob is the collective network of cable news hosts, true crime bloggers, and social media commentators. They do not operate on the presumption of innocence. They operate on attention, outrage, and swift moral judgments. The mastermind understands that if she can secure a conviction in the court of public opinion, the legal system will be forced to follow the momentum. She leverages the economics of modern media. The television networks run on a predictable algorithm. A beautiful, wealthy, Ivy League-educated woman disappearing from a quiet suburban town is guaranteed to generate maximum ratings. To escalate the narrative value of the case, she introduces a secondary variable, a pregnancy. She did not consult a doctor. Instead, she visited a pregnant acquaintance under the pretense of friendship, retrieved a sample of her urine from the bathroom, and submitted it to a local clinic under her own name. She established a medical paper trail. On paper, she is a pregnant victim. To the media, she is the ideal tragic figure. The story is irresistible. On the third day of the search, the police arrange a press conference. The flawed husband stands at a wooden podium, surrounded by his wife's family. Behind him hangs a massive poster of the mastermind's face. The room is crowded with journalists. The husband is exhausted and overwhelmed. A photographer calls out to him, asking him to step closer to the poster. The husband complies. To appease the camera and mask his discomfort, he makes a tactical error. He gives a brief, awkward smile. He does not look like a grieving man. He looks like a man enjoying the attention. The television networks take the image and run it on a loop. A prominent cable news host leads the charge. She is the voice of the mob. She does not discuss the lack of forensic evidence or the absence of a body. She analyzes his body language. She plays the clip of his smile in slow motion. She points out his posture, his lack of tears, and his calm tone of voice. In the media's court, grief has a specific performative script. You must weep on camera. You must plead with the captor. You must appear broken. Because the husband does not play his assigned role, the mob designates him as a psychopath. The narrative is locked. The power dynamic is entirely asymmetrical. The mastermind sits in a cheap motel cabin in the Ozarks. She wears oversized glasses and has dyed her hair a dull brown. She eats potato chips and sits on the edge of the bed, watching the cable news broadcast. She holds the remote control. She has orchestrated a national event from a Formica table. The flawed husband is trapped inside the television screen, defending himself against an invisible adversary. He is fighting a ghost, attempting to prove his innocence to an audience that has already decided his guilt. He attempts to maintain his defense, but the mastermind has left one more breadcrumb. The television screen cuts to a live press conference. A young 20-year-old woman steps to the microphone, flanked by a high-profile lawyer. She is crying. She apologizes to the public, admitting to her secret relationship with the flawed husband. The camera cuts back to the anchor. The flawed husband's public execution is now inevitable. The mastermind's original blueprint was designed with mathematical symmetry. She intended to watch the legal system process the flawed husband. She would monitor the indictment, the trial, and the inevitable conviction. Once the state of Missouri sentenced him to the death penalty, she would execute her final personal exit. She would travel to the coast, step into the ocean, and allow her body to be swept away. She would achieve the ultimate status, a martyr whose murder was successfully avenged by the state. Her husband would be executed for a crime that never occurred. But this blueprint contains a fundamental strategic error. In high-level military, political, or corporate strategy, plans are formulated in sterile, controlled environments. You calculate the psychology of your peers, the mechanics of the legal system, and the predictability of the media. But the real world is populated by chaotic, low-level variables that operate outside of intellectual models. Street-level reality does not respect narrative pacing or psychological chess. It operates on immediate, basic incentives, opportunity, proximity, and physical force. While she waits, the mastermind hides at a low-rent campground cabin in the Ozarks. She wears oversized clothing, dyes her hair a dull brown, and carries her entire capital reserve, $10,000 in cash, sewed inside her waist belt. She interacts with her neighbors, a pair of local grifters living in the adjacent cabin. Because she is intellectually superior, she cannot resist displaying her arrogance. She treats them with subtle condescension, assuming their lack of formal education makes them easy to manage. She miscalculates. The grifters do not analyze her syntax. They analyze her physical vulnerability. They notice that she has no vehicle, no family, and no local contacts. They observe her paying for items with large bills. They recognize an easy target. On the sixth night, they enter her cabin. They do not negotiate. They do not engage in psychological dialogue. The male grifter pins her to the floor. The female grifter uses a pair of scissors to cut the cash belt from her waist. When the mastermind attempts to speak, to use her verbal manipulation to de-escalate the situation, they strike her across the face. She is left lying on the linoleum floor. Her face is bleeding. Her money is gone. Her Ivy League degrees, her refined understanding of social psychology, and her brilliant manipulation of the national media are completely useless against 200 pounds of raw, brute force street violence. The intellectual model has collapsed. She is backed into a physical corner. She cannot report the robbery to the local police. Doing so would expose her survival and end her campaign against her husband. She cannot access her bank accounts without leaving a digital footprint. She is stranded in a rural county with zero assets, and she refuses to die a nameless death in a ditch. She runs through the list of her former suitors, looking for a resource she can exploit. She needs a temporary host, someone with massive financial reserves, a high level of discretion, and a psychological vulnerability she can immediately access. She walks along the side of the highway to a gas station. She stands in the cold rain. She picks up the payphone receiver. She drops her remaining coins into the slot. She dials the number of the one man she knows will never say no to her. To resolve her resource deficit, the mastermind accesses her database of past relationships. She selects the pawn. The pawn is a wealthy, codependent ex-boyfriend from her college years. He has spent over a decade obsessed with her, unable to establish a stable relationship with any other woman. He is governed by a specific psychological pathology, white knight syndrome. He has a deep, compulsive need to rescue women he perceives as damaged or vulnerable. For him, the act of rescue is not altruistic. It is a mechanism of control. By placing himself in the role of the savior, he establishes an asymmetrical dependency, ensuring the woman cannot leave him. The mastermind initiates the contact. She calls him from the gas station payphone, her voice trembling, her syntax fragmented by simulated panic. She tells him that her husband has physically abused her, that she is on the run, and that she has no one else to trust. The pawn responds immediately. He books private transport, retrieves her from the highway, and drives her to his remote, high-security lake house on the cliffs of the Missouri River. The property is surrounded by steel gates, surveillance cameras, and high stone walls. It is private, insulated, and secure. Within 48 hours, the mastermind recognizes the structural reality of her new position. She has traded one cage for another. The pawn begins to dictate the terms of her recovery. He insists that she dye her hair back to its original shade of blonde. He purchases a wardrobe of conservative, expensive clothes that he selected himself. He expects her to eat the specific meals he prepares, to follow his daily schedules, and to act exactly like the idealized, compliant 20-year-old girl he fell in love with in college. He uses his wealth and his protection to slowly suffocate her real identity. He is not her protector. He is her curator. Meanwhile, in the public arena, the flawed husband begins his counteroffensive. He has hired a high-priced, ruthless public relations lawyer. Under his attorney's guidance, he ceases his awkward defensive posturing. He books a prime-time national television interview. He plays her game. He steps onto the screen and delivers a calculated performance. He does not deny his affair. He confesses to it, expressing deep self-loathing. He plays the tragic, flawed, but deeply reformed husband. He speaks directly to the camera, addressing his wife by her private nicknames. He appeals directly to her intellectual ego, admitting that he was too average to appreciate her complexity, and begs her to return. The mastermind sits in the living room of the lake house, watching the broadcast. She is impressed. She evaluates his performance like a theater director assessing an actor. For 5 years, her husband was lazy, predictable, and weak. But under the pressure of imminent arrest, he has evolved. He has learned how to lie, how to manipulate the media, and how to project a false narrative to millions of people. He has become the ruthless, active partner she always wanted. She decides she wants him back, but her return is blocked by 2 logistical barriers. She is locked inside a high-security lake house with an obsessed captor who expects her to stay with him forever. And if she returns, she must explain to the FBI why she disappeared and spent weeks on the run. She stands up from the television screen. She walks down the hallway into the kitchen. The pawn is standing by the counter, chopping vegetables for her dinner, a look of quiet satisfaction on his face. He is unaware that his utility is exhausted. She looks at him, assessing the physical layout of the room, and begins to construct a new, violent narrative that will resolve both of her problems at once. To transition from her prison back to her marriage, the mastermind must rewrite the physical evidence. She requires a new crime scene, one that shifts the blame entirely away from her. She starts by staging her own captivity. Over several days, she uses the heavy metal headboard of the bed to inflict bruises on her own wrists and ankles. She sits in front of the lake house's internal security cameras, positioning herself in angles that suggest restraint and distress. She eats minimally to enhance her gaunt appearance. She builds a digital record of a hostage. She initiates the final sequence of her escape. During a scheduled evening of intimacy, she waits for the pawn to lower his guard. As he leans over her, she pulls a steel box cutter she had concealed beneath the mattress. With a single, lateral motion, she slices his throat. She does not run. She holds him against her body as he bleeds out, ensuring her clothes, her skin, and her hair are thoroughly saturated with his blood. She remains on the bed for hours, allowing the stains to dry and set, creating a physical record of trauma. She takes the pawn's car and drives back to her hometown. The flawed husband stands on his front lawn, surrounded by police cruisers and a massive crowd of journalists. A vehicle stops at the curb. The door opens. The mastermind steps out. She is pale, thin, and covered from head to toe in dried, dark blood. She stumbles across the grass. Before the police can react, she collapses directly into the flawed husband's arms. The paparazzi cameras flash. The image is captured on a loop for the national evening news. The traumatized, blood-stained wife reunited with her grieving husband. Her narrative is structurally sound. By executing the pawn, she has provided the authorities with the ultimate scapegoat. She tells the FBI a simple, linear story. She claims the pawn, obsessed with her since college, kidnapped her from her home on their anniversary, held her hostage in his remote lake house, and subjected her to constant abuse. She explains that she waited for a moment of weakness, killed him in self-defense, and escaped back to the man she loved. The physical evidence matches her story. The bruises on her wrists, the security footage, the dry blood, it is indisputable. The media celebrates her as a hero. The FBI closes the investigation. The pawn is dead, unable to offer a defense. But behind closed doors, the dynamic is different. The flawed husband knows the truth. He knows she planned her disappearance, staged the evidence, and murdered an innocent man to secure her return. He is terrified of her. In the quiet of their master bedroom, he tells her he is going to the press. He tells her he is leaving. The mastermind looks at him. She expected this response. She reveals her final move. Before her disappearance, they had stored his genetic material at a fertility clinic. During her weeks on the run, she visited the clinic, accessed the reserves, and artificially inseminated herself. She is pregnant with his child. She lays her hand on her stomach. She explains the calculation. If he leaves her, if he attempts to expose her, she will take the child. She will go to the media and present herself as a pregnant, traumatized victim, abandoned by her cruel, unfaithful husband. The mob, which already worships her as a hero, will destroy his reputation, his business, and his life. He will spend his days as a public pariah. The husband stands in the center of the room. He looks at his wife. He is completely paralyzed. The flawed husband makes his choice. He calculates the cost of resistance and realizes the price is too high. He stays. 6 months later, they sit on a television set. They hold hands, their fingers intertwined. They smile at the host, their faces illuminated by the studio lights. They announce her pregnancy to a cheering nation. To the millions of people watching at home, it is a heartwarming story of survival, forgiveness, and the restoration of a marriage. Behind the smiles, the reality is clinical. They are locked in a prison of their own design, bound together by the law of mutually assured destruction. He cannot leave without being destroyed by her narrative. She cannot expose him without exposing the falsity of her own victimhood. They have achieved a stable equilibrium through absolute hostility. The sequence of these events offers 3 distinct rules for navigating high-stakes personal and public conflicts. First, understand the power of confirmation bias. In any public or administrative dispute, physical facts are secondary to the narrative framework. Once an investigator, an employer, or the public establishes an initial hypothesis, their cognitive processes shift. They will unconsciously filter out data that contradicts their belief and focus on data that supports it. The mastermind did not attempt to fight the police department's procedures. She simply supplied the raw materials to guide their existing prejudices. She did not present the diary as a finished brief. She left it to be found in the ashes. In your own conflicts, never force a conclusion onto an adversary. Plant the breadcrumbs. Let them do the intellectual work of discovery, and they will defend your narrative with absolute conviction. Second, recognize the danger of the white knight pathology. The pawn assumed he held the leverage because he possessed the capital, the security gates, and the isolation of his lake house. He believed his act of rescue purchased her compliance. He failed to recognize that a savior is always structurally dependent on the victim they are attempting to rescue. The savior's ego is their vulnerability. They require your weakness to feel powerful. If you encounter a partner, an employer, or a colleague who insists on saving you, recognize that they are trading protection for possession. The moment you assert your autonomy, Their benevolence will turn into control. By stepping into the role of the protector, the pawn allowed her to define the boundaries of his existence, ultimately converting his safe house into his execution chamber. Third, accept that public reality is a constructed optic. The mob does not possess the capacity or the desire to process complex, multi-layered truths. They do not want a detailed forensic breakdown of a failing marriage. They want recognizable archetypes. They want clear heroes to celebrate and clear villains to destroy. The husband only survived because he learned this rule. He stopped arguing the facts and began playing the role the public demanded, the repentant sinner. If you find yourself in a narrative war, do not argue the details. Address the archetype. Play the part the audience needs to see, and use their expectations to neutralize the threat. In a highly public conflict, the truth is not discovered, it is broadcast. Whoever controls the optics controls the operational reality of the situation. The blood has been washed from the floors of the lake house. The legal case has been permanently closed, and the television airwaves have moved on to the next national tragedy. But the terrifying mechanics of narrative control, psychological framing, and tactical manipulation remain fully active in the world around us. Thank you for analyzing these structures of deception with us. Observe the behavior of those around you, manage your own narrative, and we will see you in the next study of manipulation.